those of you who did come up and physically, and for those of you who are on Zoom. I don't know, there's probably some people in Zoom that maybe I don't know. So like Nicole said, my name is Deanna. I'm co-director of athletics. And I've been here at Highlands for five to 6 years. And I really am excited to talk to you guys today about some sports lessons that I've learned that I think are under taught and extremely underrated. So to give you a little bit of background on myself, I'm probably going to share more about myself than what I usually do because these are totally subjective and they're mainly opinion. So if you disagree, let's have some conversation afterwards. But this is maybe supposed to spark some interest in athletics and some interest in just having dialogue regarding sports and the way that society kind of use it. So I didn't necessarily grow up in a family that was super sports driven or really like we didn't care about sports that much. I actually was way more interested in like dance and ballet and music and things like that. But I didn't really ever get involved in any of that because my twin sister beat me to the punch and she showed up with a flyer for youth basketball, and that's how we got signed up. Because it was cheaper and it was good for scheduling, and that's basically how I got involved in sports. So I wasn't really excited when I went to the first practice. I was actually kind of bummed out because I remember specifically asking my mom, like, but can't I do dance? Like, my twin sister's name is Shy, and I was like, can't Shy do basketball? And why can't you sign me up for ballet? Like, what's the problem? And so I wasn't excited at all until I realized that I had this like competitive fire inside of me that I didn't know existed until I showed up to this basketball practice. And they put us in 2 different teams and they made us compete against each other and like try to make 5 shots faster than the other team. And that was really when I was like, okay, I think I like sports. It's not as like terrible as I thought it was, or I thought it would be. And so I remember getting into the car with my mom, and my mom was like, she was really concerned because I was not into it. Usually as a kid, I was pretty motivated to be a part of whatever it is that she signed me up for. And so she asked me, how did you like it? What did you think? And I was like, yeah, no, I don't like the sport, but I like winning. If that part's fun. Competing is fun. I really like that. I don't know why they keep telling me like that I'm double dribbling or that I'm traveling. I don't really know what that means, but I like competing. That was fun. And my sister was on the other team and my team beat hers and that was cool. And it kind of sparked this competitive edge in all of my sisters. So I grew up with all sisters, and we all kind of found that we have that we really value competition, I guess, in my family, by really getting involved in sports. But there was one thing, or I guess that leads me to my first lesson in sports that I feel like is underrated, and it's what a true competitor's mindset is. So when we were really young, we used to play the game Trouble. Everybody knows that game is, right? And my dad would play it with us, and my mom knew that when we like got the board game out after dinner or something, that it was probably like the lightheartedness went out the window because we were all going to just like really compete against each other. And we usually all ended up getting in trouble and getting sent to our rooms because we were too competitive, and somebody would end up like cussing the other one out, or somebody would end up flipping the board, and it wasn't fun. And so what I learned and what I grew into was understanding that a competitor's mindset and a really productive competitor's mindset exercises control. So the best competitors not just in sports, but outside of athletics, they exercise control. They don't let their emotions take over the task at hand. They don't necessarily let outside opinions dictate the way that they behave. They exercise poise in all of their competitions. The second component of this is that they understand who their opponent actually is. So team sports, I've always really only been a part of team sports. And I always used to think it was so weird how coaches will tell you that you're supposed to compete for your top spot. Right, so, and I play basketball, so you have 5 starters. You're supposed to compete against everybody on your team to get in that 5, that top 5. And even once you get there, you're supposed to still continue competing with them to stay in the top 5, because there's always somebody that's going to come after you. But what we don't really teach is that during practice times, you're competing internally. But we don't tell athletes that there's a flip that needs to be switched once it's game day. So now you're not necessarily competing internally, you flip it, and now you're competing externally. And that's not something that I think we teach quite enough. And it's also a really, really hard lesson to learn too, is that you have to know when you're competing internally and when you start to focus your attention on beating people outside of your team. And then the last thing that I think a true competitor's mindset consists of is that they know when to compete, and they know that there's a time and place. So, like I said, I'm a twin. And when you're a twin, you're basically born into competition. Even if you don't want to be, you're born into it, because there's always going to be comparison, and there's always kind of this person right next to you that is easily comparable. And so from a very young age, I was kind of shown that people really want you to compete against each other. And it took me a really, really long time. And I think probably about 25 years or so to understand that competition has a time and it has a place, but it shouldn't necessarily enter all of your relationships. So growing up, my sister and I, we would compete in almost everything. And coaches would tell us that, like, why don't you guys line up? Let's see which one's faster. Why don't you guys, let me see your grade report. Let's see which one's smarter. All of those things. And if there was a time when we were we're going to the mall, let's say, there's this story that I have where this is the best way to kind of explain the way the competition can be really, I guess, where understanding the time and place for competition is really important, is that we were going to go to the mall one time, and I get dressed and I fix my hair and put a little bit of makeup on. I'm in high school, right? So I'm like, I'm going to the mall. You look good, right? And my sister walks out. She's in sweatpants and she doesn't really care. Most of the time, she doesn't really care, to be honest. But she sees what I'm wearing. She turns around and she goes into the room. And she walks out, getting all dressed up. She gets, she fixes her hair. She puts makeup on, and so we look at each other and we're not like, oh, you look good. Yeah, you look good too. That's not the vibe that we get. We were looking at each other like now all of a sudden I'm gonna go inside and I'm gonna change my clothes because I need to look better, right? That's what competition is about. And it wasn't until we turned 25 when we had that conversation about how unhealthy that was, and how unhealthy it was for us to not understand that competition has its time and its place, but it should never enter our relationship. So these are the 3 things that I think that all competitors and true, really productive competitors embody. And then I'm going to move on to the next one. So the next one is that hard work doesn't always pay off the way that you want it to. And I think everybody in here probably has had an experience where they feel like they're the hardest worker on the team. And I've had many teammates who were kind of the workhorses of the team. They were the ones that always showed up super early. They were always the ones that left last. And they were probably the ones that came in first in sprints. And it really had nothing to do with talent or skill. It had everything to do with the fact that they just outworked everybody. And I think it's really difficult for athletes to understand that just because you're the hardest worker on the team, it doesn't mean that you always get the outcome that you want, which is most of the time people want playing time, right? Or they want that starting spot. In a work setting, they want that promotion. You want to be elevated. You want to have some type of reward for working hard and being the hardest worker. But the reality is that you can be the hardest worker on the team, and you can give everything that you have, but it doesn't always result with what, for the end, it doesn't always, in the end, it doesn't always play out to be what you want it to be. So my sister is a really great example of this. It was funny because I asked her, I'm like, what do you think the most underrated lesson that you learned from basketball was? And she said, I knew that she would say something like this. But I didn't really have the words to articulate it, and she said it perfectly, so these are really her words. Was that she always worked way, way harder than me. I'll admit, I was kind of lazy. I wasn't really motivated to have, the work ethic that she had. But because I wanted to compete, I was like, well, clearly I'm gonna go to the gym. Like, I'm not going to go to the gym and get better than me, and I'll go with you. But she was just intrinsically motivated. And what she said was that she wishes that she would have realized that playing time wasn't the best thing she could get. But that, you know, she just recently got promoted into a really good job, and she's really only been there for a month. But because they saw her work ethic, and because they saw how much time she dedicated and how much she was committed to her craft, she got a promotion. And she said that she wishes she would have realized that back then, because she would have had a little bit more motivation to continue to work hard. So the valuable lesson is this is that we really should value the things that come after our sport is finished. When you put in all of the work and maybe you didn't get all of the playing time, or maybe you didn't get the starting spot, maybe your process just really isn't completed yet. You know, the award will come later. And so just a little bit of encouragement if that is you, or you know somebody who's kind of been in that space where you feel like you're just outworking everybody, and you're outworking you know, your teammates maybe, but it hasn't, you know, been fruitful yet. Just keep working, because maybe you're just not at that point yet, but it's going to come. Okay, so this one is a little controversial. I was debating on whether or not I wanted to put this one in, but I think that in sports, it's easy for us to talk about being the example. And it's easy for us to talk about those physical things that people can see. But the reality is that not everybody learns or wants to lead by seeing somebody's example, or maybe they don't really know how to follow. So leading by example and doing all of the right things and doing the behaviors and the actions, it's not enough. So if you want to be a true leader, and if you really want to impact change, you have to be willing to learn to lead in other ways. So I've had a lot of teammates, I know a lot of people who just refuse to go in and ask for promotions or raises or whatever it is that they feel like they deserve. And they say, I really wish that somebody would just see the hard work that I put in and how much of a great example I am for people. And then, you know, give me a promotion, or give me the starting spot, or give me whatever it is that they feel like they deserve. But you have to be willing to have the courage to go and vocally express that. You have to be willing to try to lead in other ways if you want to get the end result that you want, but also if you want other people to follow you. Which also means that you probably need to be willing to grow at the things that you're really not good at. So leading by example means that people typically see the things that you do well. But if you don't ever vocalize, or if you don't ever talk about the things that you know you don't do well, or the things that you know you need to grow in, chances are people don't always want to follow you. Like, people don't always want to just follow somebody that does all the physical things really well. And so you really just need to be willing to accept that you're probably not good at it. You probably need to grow in a lot of different things. But vocalizing that and talking through it is something that I think is really beneficial, as well. And then the next thing is that you have to be willing to welcome feedback. So having difficult conversations is something that I think athletics, it provides, you basically have an opportunity for that after every loss, right? You also have an opportunity after every win, but most people focus on the loss. And so I think that when you welcome feedback, it provides people that example of seeing somebody that doesn't shy away from difficult conversations and conflicts, of maybe opinions and things like that. And so real leaders welcome that. They welcome that feedback and they welcome those difficult conversations that are often really kind of emotional and can be really taxing, and they can sometimes cause animosity between teams and things like that. But if you are able to take feedback and if you're able to apply it, that's the type of leadership that I think people want to follow. And so my next one, what just didn't say? It's not supposed to be. Okay. Well, the next one is that sports are meant to unite people. So, how many of you guys played sports in high school? Or played something? Some kind of. What is kind of? Like you either did or you didn't. We're not. Here's the great thing. So this, I'm so glad you said that. So if you couldn't hear her on Zoom, Shauna said, we're not good at sports. So the best thing about sports is this, you don't have to be good. So a lot of times in athletics, we attach this value to people based on their production in their sport or based on what they accomplished, you know, with whatever it was that they did. So whether you were a coach, whether you're a manager, whether you're a player, all of that stuff, it really doesn't matter whether you were good at it. The best thing about sports is that anybody can show up and anybody can participate. And you can either be a fan, you can be an athletic trainer, you can be a coach, you can be somebody a part of the game day experience. There's so many different areas that you can be a part of sports with. And it welcomes all different types of people. So whether you understand it or not, but you understand the social media aspect of it, the great thing about sports is that there's a place for everybody. You just have to be willing to kind of bridge those barriers. The other amazing thing that sports does is that it unites people in tradition. So I don't know how many years we've been doing these ancient talks. Julie, is this the third year? And so homecoming week is really special because there's all of these different traditions that we have been, you know, we might have done them for 10 years, 20 years, 5 years, 3 years, whatever. But at the end of the week, I don't know if everybody realizes, but we play a football game. That is the reason why we have homecoming. And that game, like that single game, unites all of these people for this 1 week. And so as an athletic director, I oftentimes sit and I wonder, I'm like, what would it be like if we were able to create this kind of engagement for more than just 1 week? Realistically, we probably couldn't do it for like every single week, right? Because we have games going on every single week. But if we can use sports as a way to unite people in tradition for more than just 1 week, imagine how much our community would be impacted by that. And so the last part about sports uniting people is that it just creates leaders who impact other leaders and other people. In my life, I've been very fortunate to have some pretty amazing coaches that were all skilled in different areas. So I had some really great skills coaches. I had some really good coaches who instilled like cultural values in me and really philosophical ideas like this, like what I shared with you guys today. And I've had coaches who really taught me, things that I didn't like about sports. And for me, I feel like all of those different experiences and relationships that I had with different coaches and teammates, kind of helped shape me into the person that I am today. And the way that I lead and the way that I think about, I guess the world, I do kind of think about it in a unique way, because athletics kind of shaped the way that I operate. But ultimately, I think that athletics is a fantastic avenue and a fantastic vessel for us to bring people together. And so, I'm gonna end that with, I hope everybody shows up to the athletic events that we have this week. We've got cross country on Thursday at the golf course at 3 o'clock. And it is the only event that we'll have for cross country. Men and women will be competing. We will have volleyball that night as well at 5 o'clock, I believe. And then we will also have, obviously our big homecoming football game at Sanchez Stadium on Saturday at 1 o'clock, and then we'll have volleyball that night as well. So please come to all of the events, not just the athletic ones, but all of the really great things that we planned for everybody this week. We're really excited, and I hope that we can see all you guys at the event.
I don't see any questions yet. Any questions here in the room for Shannon?
So how has playing sports kind of impacted your leadership styles, as you're currently sitting as a co-AD? I mean, you're relatively young. Congratulations on all the hard work that you put into this. And you think that gives you unique perspectives to navigate younger coaches and working with student athletes as well? How has your experiences in sport prepare you for this type of role?
I think it's giving me confidence. Because I know there's a lot that I don't know, and I'm confident enough to know that there's so much room for me to grow. And I'm not necessarily embarrassed by that. And then I also think that I also think that I just really love what I do, which means that I want to grow. So being a part of athletics and being able to kind of give back to a community that I once was in, like as a student athlete, it's impactful for me. But I really love being in athletics, and I really like being in athletics. That kind of is, so.
We're very fortunate to have.
Any other questions from the room? See you have a question.
Sure, I'll ask a question. So what would you say is the difference now that you are an athletic director between working with players versus working with coaches?
Shannon, can you repeat it? Question, just so we can hear you.
Yeah, Ian asked, what are the differences between working with players and working with coaches? Age. So, I mean, when I'm, working with student athletes you're kind of seen as like a mentor, and it's a little bit, it's much easier because they typically come to you because they need something. Where with coaches, it's very similar. They typically come to you because they need something as well. But it's just a different dynamic to work with different ages, but it's great because I'm working with more seasoned people. So they understand, they actually probably understand the way that athletics has been here way more than me. They have much more experience than I do. Which is something that I really value, and I like learning from them, and I like having those kind of difficult or muddy conversations with them. And so it's just a different dynamic, but both have been equally gratifying for me, but I mean, I've only been in this position for a short amount of time. So I'll probably have a better answer in maybe a couple of months.
I have a question. So thank you so much, Sharon, for your presentation. I was taking some notes because I was like, oh yeah, that's good. We oftentimes, in my role, see the entire student body, but also have an understanding of the additional challenges that student athletes have, in addition to being students, right? And not in a bad way, but they're more complex than the regular student body. So these ideas, these concepts that you have, do you have ideas on how to incorporate these into, put them into practice with your student athletes?
Well, the biggest thing that I would say is that, you have to have these kinds of conversations. And it probably has to be a little bit more, individual. Because I think that when I look back on the experiences that I've had, when I learned the most, it was when it was individual, when it was a personal conversation. And so, I mean, I went to a few different schools. I went to a junior college and then I went to one, and then I went to a four-year school and then I went to another four-year school. So I went to three, I had three college coaches. And, I really felt their investment in teaching me these kinds of values, or whatever values they were trying to teach in their program. I registered them more when it was one-on-one, or when it was in a smaller group setting. So I think for, not just for coaches, but for administrators too, when we address people in general terms, or when we address them generally, it's easy for student athletes to think that it doesn't apply to them. The best example I have is like if a coach is, you're running sprints, right? And there's one kid that isn't touching the line. So you keep making them do it. A lot of times coaches will be like, one of you is not touching the line. We're gonna keep running. Ian, do you do that? One of you is not touching the line, so we're just gonna keep running. And they all think like, it's not me. I'm touching the line, clearly. I mean, I'm not paying attention that much, but I'm clearly touching the line, right? So when it's addressed generally, it just goes over their head. They don't think it applies. So the more smaller group settings or the more individual you can get with teaching whatever values you have. So like whatever values CARES might have, or whatever values deans have, anything from foundation, anything from community engagement, like all of that stuff. If you can get a smaller group, you can be a little bit more intentional with whatever your message is. That's where I think the goal is.
I'll ask a follow-up question. So I understand like your thought on that is like addressing this individually with students, right? Do you have thoughts on how you address it with coaches to help, them to address these types of issues individually in order to, in essence, change the culture of the department, right? Like I understand like it's at the micro individual level, right? But that philosophy or that belief has to start at the macro level of somewhere. Do you have thoughts on how to address that, or? I'm just curious.
I think it's maybe I'm not understanding the question, but from what I gathered from it, I think that you have to, if it comes from the top, right, and essentially, let's say that Jim and I are at the top, okay? If we don't have those individual conversations and model that behavior, and be able to kind of dig a little bit deeper down into the surface of like, how do you lead your team? How do you talk to them? When you want them to do something, whether it's on the field, on a field, on a drive, whatever, how do you teach it? What words do you use? What's your voice sound like? What's the volume of it? How much have you planned before you went into that conversation? How comfortable are you having difficult conversations where a student athlete thinks that you're wrong and that they should be starting, But I think when you model that behavior and when you actively say, I'm modeling this for you. We're working through this together. To me, that's the best way for anybody to learn how to go and like do it elsewhere. And we're fortunate, like I think that we have fantastic coaches that really They know, like, they really know how to communicate the values of their program out. And so we're fortunate to have pretty good head coaches that we could do that. So those are my ideas, but I haven't really had to do that much. I will give you guys 28 minutes of your time. Oh, did you have a question? Never mind.
I just have one more question. Right? I mean, I think given the title we talk, underrated lessons. I think a lot of what happens is that the lessons are so underrated, even by the athletes, that they're not learned. And so like, I'll just take an example of uniting people as I think the final lesson. I think that's one that's often not learned. And that competition can become, as you mentioned earlier, you can become over competitive. Folks can be divisive, folks can be so focused on their final time and they're going to be very angry with you and even the other players for not getting what they deserve. And so I guess my question is, how do you elevate the lessons of, or just take that one example of uniting people as opposed to letting competition divide people? How do you manage that as a coach or a player to ensure that the lesson is not really? It's a long question. Sorry.
That's a good one, though. I can't repeat it back. I'm sorry if you can't hear me. I think that for me specifically, I really believe that that's like the best thing about sports. But if you don't believe it, you probably can't teach it. And if you haven't experienced it, any little part of it, so like this right here, like I kind of knew who was going to show up. I didn't really know, but like I had a feeling that I knew who was going to be interested in seeing what the, Sabine Athletics has to say. And I think Bob's been really good with that too. Bob's had a few of these too. So I think that like people are just kind of interested in sports because there's a competition every weekend. There's essentially a show every weekend, right? And I think that if you don't believe that sports are supposed to unite people, then you're probably not, that means you're probably not inviting. You're probably not using it as a tool to shape people into thinking about more than just themselves. So number one, you have to believe yourself. So if you're a coach or if you're an administrator, if you're a leader at all, you have to believe that, and you're in athletics, you have to believe that it's supposed to unite. And that trumps the competition, that trumps the competitor, that trumps the, maybe the egotistical things that sometimes come with athletics and sports teams and those types of things. And so as a coach, you really have to show that you value it. So do you put more of an emphasis on wins and losses and those technical type things, or do you put more of an emphasis on the culture? Because the culture that you're trying to build will address your unity within your team more than what your wins and losses will. But once again, like conversation and like conversations are huge.
We just want to thank you for taking time out of your